This is Deploy Asana Successfully, episode number 2. Today with Bastien Siebman, we're going to talk about the planning and the discovery you have to make before setting up Asana in your organization. Welcome to Deploy Asana Successfully. Welcome to Deploy Asana Successfully, episode number 2 with my friend Bastien Siebman. Bastien, how are you?
I'm really good. How are you?
Good. It's quite hot, summertime. It has taken a while to be as hot as it's these days, almost hitting 40.
Oh, really?
Well, but luckily the air conditioning works pretty well in the office, so all good. Well, in our first episode, we discussed about the first steps that any Asana champion or any Asana consultant have to take into account when thinking about deploying Asana. Let's say that the decision has been made and your organization is going to deploy Asana. Today, we're going to discuss the first steps when a team wants to deploy Asana. Usually, consultants have like a checklist of items that need to review with the organization that is going to deploy Asana. My first question, Bastien, is it the same steps for both small teams and big corporations, or you have a different approach depending on the size of the team?
I think it's pretty much the same steps, because when we deploy Asana in a big corporation, we usually try to break things down into smaller groups, smaller teams, and then deploy each team just like we were deploying a small company. The only difference in the case of a big company is we have some overarching deployment, which means if each team has a champion, then we usually put those champions together, and then we identify what's called a super champion to make sure that we have at least one point of contact instead of having like 12 or 20 points of contact. Apart from that, I think we usually follow the same steps. We usually have what we call the framing to understand the way that team specifically works. Then we have the workshops with the champions, we have the trainings with everybody, and we have the debrief. But all of that assumes that you identified who's the champion, you identify with which team you want to start and which workflows, kind of identify the workflows you want to deploy. And I think those would be the first steps. Who's going to lead the deployment? Who are you going to be deploying to? Which teams and which workflows you want to focus
on? For those that might not follow our previous episode, how do you identify an Asana champion? What are the items that make you say, well, this is our champion in this team or in this organization?
First, I would say that this is someone that wants to be a champion. If you force someone, it doesn't work. Also, that person needs to have some kind of bandwidth to act as a champion. Sometimes clients ask us, how long does it take? So let's say a couple of hours for the first few weeks, then a couple of hours per month afterwards. It really depends on many different factors, but I think that's a good rule of thumb. So they need to want it, they need to have the time, they need to have the support, obviously. And usually they need to be somewhat tech savvy, because if they struggle to do anything with a software or a computer, that's going to be hard. We want people that learn quickly and are curious and really enjoy helping others as well. So they need some level of empathy and training skills, even if that can come later when we also train them ourselves. Would you add anything?
I would add that it's also a good rule of thumb if someone has been in a similar process in a previous organization or in a previous job. Like, in fact, sometimes it's the way to populate Asana. Someone that has been working in a previous job that they were using Asana and then moves to another company, and
they are struggling to get things done, and is the promoter to deploy Asana, this might be also a good champion, because probably.
And
Yeah, go ahead.
also, just wanted to clarify, a champion is not a manager. It's not the same thing at all. The champion could be someone that sits at the bottom of the org chart, which is perfectly fine. And again, they just need some empathy and the willingness to learn and teach others. Also, champions don't have to be the ones that introduced Asana to the company in the first place. Usually that helps because they already know Asana, but it might be a two-edged swords, which means might be hard for them because then everybody will associate Asana with them, and they were probably already doing so. So if the deployment is struggling, then people might identify that person as responsible, even though it's not completely true. So sometimes the person introducing Asana doesn't have to be the actual champion in the end.
Yeah, I agree with you on that. Also, I think that having these skills, knowing how Asana works, can also be very valuable in an organization. Maybe it, as you said, it's a two-edged sword, because you might be asked a lot of questions, but also your position in the organization might be safer. And in times where some businesses are experiencing a lot of layoffs, being valuable for your organization, it's always good. Let's talk about the why statement. Sometimes I find that organizations or teams are blinded by the lights and the colors of Asana, but they don't have a clear idea about why they are going to deploy Asana, why they want Asana, and it's a good exercise for the team and for the organization to work on that why statement and to dig deeper and understand what are they pain points and what are the key metrics they want to improve. Don't you find this situation in the teams that you've worked with in the past?
Yeah, not really. I mean, so we are Asana partners, and we only sell and deploy Asana. So usually when people talk to us and contact us, they already chose Asana or they just need help deciding. So they usually identified a problem they want to solve. Asana is not cheap. It's not completely easy to deploy, so they wouldn't go through all of that without a good reason. So they usually have one. However, I would agree with you that sometimes the person buying the tool has a reason that the others do not know about. And sometimes it's a bad reason. For example, we've had clients in the past telling us, I don't know what my team is doing on a daily basis. I feel like they are slacking off and I need to be spying on them to see what they're doing every day. This is not what Asana is for. It's a bad reason. On the other end, most of the time, they know that the current way they're working doesn't work. They know that they are overworked, overwhelmed, tired, and they have a lack of clarity. So in that case, it's an obvious why. They just want to get back on track. They want some clarity and they want to release the pressure somehow.
I think that it's also a good exercise to put everyone on the same page, because usually when you have this type of conversations and there's a bunch of members of the organization, sometimes they have different whys, different reasons, the different pain points, and it's good like to list all of them and understand that, okay, we're going through this process in order to solve this. I try to avoid engagements where Asana is a solution in search of a problem.
What do you mean?
Because it's it's okay. Asana is fantastic. It's a beautiful tool, but why do you want Asana? And there's no reason why. Because either it's a small team that it's working fine, or either it's an organization that has to solve other things before deploying Asana, like let's say more business related, or even in terms of
And
processes.
I agree with you. And this is something we see quite often is Asana's going to reveal problems that you have and that you probably did not know you had. Because as soon as you deploy Asana, you have to clearly define the processes and the internal workflows. And this is where you're going to discover some skeletons in the closet and some very weird processes that you have internally. And you might even realize you can't even get on the same page about basic stuff you do on a daily basis. And I would agree with you in that case, Asana is not the problem. You have other problems you need to solve first, or you need to use the Asana deployment as an excuse to solve those problems. In that case, that puts us consultants in a awkward spot because we are in the middle of the discussions. But sometimes we just walk away from the discussion and let them discuss and find a way forward, and then we come back in when they're ready to deploy Asana again.
Yeah, I would add that it's very common, and I think that it's one of these aha moments when you are in the first calls with a client, and they start challenging their processes, their systems, because once they have to drill down all the steps, all the milestones, all the approvals, it's like they're challenging something that probably has been settled for years. And what I would say to a potential consultant or a potential Asana champion is, when you find yourself in one of these spots, this means that it's healthy. It's, as you said, it's like it's very common that when you want to put on a great tool as Asana your processes, you will find some inefficiencies that have been in the organization for years. And I think that it's one of the good signals, even if it's sometimes an argument inside the organization, or it's a discussion and you feel like in crossfire, but it's good. I like to tell our clients that when you challenge your processes, this means that you are moving forward. Do you agree?
And I think deploying Asana is also a good opportunity to go into an ongoing improvement process, because those companies usually they haven't mapped their workflows properly, and something that isn't documented doesn't really improve. You can't really improve those processes, or that might be hard. But as soon as they are within Asana, as soon as you have clear sections and clear automations, then you can start tweaking and improve things as you go. And sometimes clients, they think that you deploy Asana and then everything's going to be fine. And for 10 years, you're going to be set. It doesn't work this way. You set up Asana and 3 months later, 1 month later, you have to improve something and change. And one project has to become 2 projects, or 3 projects have to be merged into one. And we see this in our own Asana. We improve things all the time because processes needs to evolve. Asana makes it easier, but it never ends. And people have to realize that it actually never ends. And that's why the champions need to have some time set apart every month to be able to help everybody, because it never ends. You have to improve everything all the time.
Yeah, I would like to talk about another idea that it's very common in these first steps, that it's tribal knowledge. Sometimes organizations have a lot of knowledge that sits in the brain of their employees, but if one of these employees leaves the company, the company is totally lost. They don't know how to do the core processes in their business operations. And Asana is also good to pull this tribal knowledge and store it in a tool that it's collaborative, that it's shared across the organization, that it helps to onboard new team members. And this is positive for scaling up your business. So it's also important to understand. This is one of the questions that I like to repeat to the teams when we are deploying Asana is, does this task describe exactly? So if tomorrow you have a new team member, reading the title of the task and the description of the task is enough to provide the value that this task is about, and pulling this and digging deep into this tribal knowledge. I think that it's very important in these first steps. Is like to put all this information, all this. It's like creating an internal Wikipedia for the organization with all the knowledge, all the processes and systems that sometimes, as I said, sit in the brain of the people, and that's not scalable.
Yeah, I definitely agree, because people leave companies all the time. You might have a high turnover, but even if you have a low turnover, you can have people breaking their legs or arms or being sick or whatever, and suddenly they won't be there for 2 weeks or 3 weeks. So you have to be able to pick up their work. So I agree with you, things have to be described properly. However, I've had a case, so I agree with you 100%. I had a case where I helped a client create this amazing project template, and we described everything, and this was like it was a masterpiece, like the best templates I've ever seen. They started using the template, and what happened was the most senior members of the team felt like we were telling them what to do, even though they knew exactly what to do because they've been doing it for years. And they really didn't like how detailed the template was. And that's something that might be hard sometimes. When people do a job for so long, they don't see the benefit of listing everything. And using a tool like Asana, they don't see it as a way to unload their minds because they have been on autopilot for so long. The problem is they usually do things not exactly the same way other people do them internally. So that leads to inconsistencies, and that makes it hard for them to it's hard for them to change and have those little change in workflows to make sure everybody aligns on the same workflow. I think those are the ones that are the hardest to work with, because the entire company wants to change, but some people internally feel like everybody's fine and we were fine with emails. And I've had people tell me, I'm really good with my emails, why would I need Asana? And the answer is you need Asana because the others need to collaborate with you, even though you're very good yourself. The others have to align. And when you're gone, people have to pick up your work and they don't know exactly how you work because you don't do anything, you don't document anything.
Well, that's a very, very good approach. I was thinking, because this is a very common question. It's like, okay, now that you've detailed the whole process, and it's like hundreds or maybe even thousands of tasks and milestones and approvals, it's like, well, that's a lot of work. And sometimes I find myself saying, oh, yeah, but usually all these tasks were like email messages or conversations in
your head.
Teams or Slack. It's like WhatsApp, coffee machine conversations. Now you have all this information like stored. And I think that this approach, that what happens if you leave the company, all this will be stored, and the people that will come will find it easier to follow the same process. It's more scalable at the end of the day. Let's talk about tools. We mentioned email, we mentioned Slack or Teams. What should be the approach? I like very much the puzzle approach. Like you have all these pieces, and Asana should mix correctly, should fit inside these pieces. What are the main things you have to take into consideration regarding tools when you want to deploy Asana?
I think you need a clear map of the tools you're currently using. And also you need a clear understanding of how people are using them. For example, just writing down we use Slack is not enough. You need to investigate, do you use Slack as a chat quick tool? Do you use Slack as a work management tool? Do you use Google Sheets as a work management as well? Or do you only do financial reports in Google Sheets? Because some of the things done in those tools will have to go to Asana at one point. Some of the stuff you do with those tools should stay with those tools. And some of those tools will be completely replaced. For example, let's say you have a ticketing system in place, like a Zendesk ticketing system. How deep are you going into Zendesk? Are you really using Zendesk to the full extent of what it does? Or is it just simply like a task list? And in the end, maybe you can do everything in Asana and not pay for Zendesk anymore. So you really have to map everything and then understand clearly where Asana sits ideally within that ecosystem. And you know that you're not going to change everything overnight. So Asana has to slowly replace bits and pieces of that ecosystem. So you need a clear plan of what is going to be replaced first and second, and who you have to train, and then make sure you replace each workflow with something as identical as possible within Asana to not disturb anyone.
Cool. This is one of the most typical questions. It's should I stop talking to my colleagues on Slack or on Teams or WhatsApp? Usually my advice is if this is actionable or this is something that can involve other people, maybe it's better to have this conversation inside a task or inside a project on Asana. And if it's like an informal chat that has no additional consequences, maybe that you can have, you can still use a Slack. Sometimes, like saying, "Hey, do you have 5 minutes for a quick call?" You need this type of tools for this type of informal conversations, messages. But if the information is important and it's necessary to lock this conversation linked to a task or linked to a project, then you should use Asana. Do you agree on that?
I do. There is a famous quote that developers use that says, "No Jira, no work." That means if you ask me to fix a bug at the coffee machine, I won't do anything. It has to go into Jira. It has to be a ticket. It has to be prioritized because I'm going to be writing code and I will be attaching that code to a ticket. So no Jira, no work. I think it's the same thing with Slack and Asana. If it's not in Asana, it doesn't exist. If you tell me to do something in Slack, I'm going to tell you, okay, fine, where's the task? So Slack should really only be a quick chat tool. I usually say, how's your weekend? Are you coming to the meeting? And where is this task or project we talked about? That's it. All the rest goes into Asana. Too often, and I love Slack, but I think too often people do too much in Slack. And also people are not trained at Slack. People suck at Slack. People do not know how to use threads properly. They don't know how to use emojis properly. They give you thumbs up on your Slack message to approve something, but they don't know that you don't get notified about thumbs up on messages. So 3 days later, they're like, you haven't done anything. And I'm like, you didn't tell me anything. Yeah, but I put a thumbs up. Yeah, that's not how it works. You need to go into Asana to do the work and use Slack to discuss sometimes. The other problems I see is people trying to connect Asana and Slack too much. So there are two cases. You want to send updates from Asana to Slack. The problem is people will just sit in Slack, wait for the updates and not go into Asana because they know they will be informed in Slack anyway. The other problems I see is the ability to create tasks from Slack. The problem is that a task created from Slack is usually quickly written, only has a title, not assigned to the correct person, no description, not placed in the right project. There's not much you can decide within Slack. So you usually end up with a pretty bad task, bad title, ending up in someone my tasks and not triaged properly. So if you want to create work, you go into Asana. Asana has to be opened all the time. as well as your emails, as well as Slack. If you just open Asana when you have something to do, I think it doesn't work. It has to stay open. It has to be at the center of everything.
I agree, and I would add that, as in many skills in Asana, the basics are super important, and I like to spend a lot of time in our trainings talking about how to create a task correctly, like how to title the task, how to create the description, how you choose the assignee, how you choose the collaborators, what's the impact of being a collaborator. Because sometimes, like it's so easy to create a task that tasks are not created correctly, and that's like the foundation of your whole Asana space. If tasks are not correctly created, then everything like might fall like a house of cards. It's not. So I like to invest a lot of time, and I think that it's very important that if you are an Asana champion, you are working with your team to spend a lot of time working on how to create tasks correctly, and in the first weeks or in the first months that your team is using Asana, help your teams correct them, help to improve, to raise the level of how tasks are created.
Yeah, definitely. It's going to take time. People are usually not used to having small pieces of work like this. A task is usually quite small, and people feel quite overwhelmed pretty quickly when they see the amount of tasks that they have. But the reality is, this is work you already had. It just it was in a different form, and as you said earlier, it was all over the place with no ability to see everything clearly in one list and prioritize and organize. So it does feel overwhelming, but at the same time, the smaller and the cleaner is a task, the easier it is to delegate to someone or just to do. And you can quickly go through a list and check things up pretty quickly. And sometimes it feels like you're doing work, but you don't move forward that much. That's why tasks don't have to be too small either. So you just have to find exactly the right balance.
Yeah, we are in the last minutes of these episodes. I would like to ask you also, now talking about big corporations that want to deploy Asana, I think that there are like two different approaches. One is like we start with a small team, one workflow, and once this is successful, we expand to another team or additional workflows. The other approach is like we jump into the swimming pool and we try to move everything to Asana. We know that we might struggle for maybe months, but once we are up and running, we have everything working on Asana. I must say I prefer the former than the later. What's your opinion on that?
And I think there's also a third approach, which is testing Asana quickly, getting a sales agreement to cover the entire company, but then deploying slowly. And that's usually what we see. We see big companies doing a call for tender, request for information, request for proposal. They want to buy Asana for everyone, and then we decide on a clear plan. 50 licenses first, then 100, 300, 600, and then we deploy slowly. That's usually the best approach. But the official Asana way of change, I think that's the name, is indeed to pick a team, pick one workflow, migrate that workflow into Asana, then a second workflow, third workflow, another team, etc., etc. What's hard is that usually the workflow they want to pick is a workflow that involves everyone, like marketing and IT and finance and legal, and those people don't have licenses yet. So you have to explain to them that Asana still brings value, even though those people are not in Asana yet, or you need to onboard everyone at the same time. So yeah, it's really hard sometimes to find the right workflow and have the right cadence, the right speed, and it might be uncomfortable for a while because you might be doing stuff the old way as well as the new way for a little while. but I think in the end, it's all worth it.
Yeah, and I think that doing this one team, one workflow, and then expand it helps, because you have then additional ambassadors inside the company because they already work with Asana, and it's very organic. As you said, when you are deploying a workflow, one of the most typical questions is, well, but this task involves finance, and finance is not yet onboarded. Well, then we know if there are a lot of finance tasks, then you know that the next team or the next workflow will involve onboarding the finance department into Asana.
Yeah.
So it's very organic, and that's why I like it very much, because it's not like an external consultant that is trying to expand or to force the company to go at a certain pace. It's like it's the company that it's pulling you to deploy Asana to other teams, and I think that it's great. And from a consultant or a champion perspective, it's very rewarding to see that you're adding value to that team, that their life is much better, that they don't have the anxiety at the end of the day, that the job is done, they know what to expect from tomorrow, they can track projects. So yeah, let's leave it here for today. If you are listening or viewing this podcast, you can leave questions in the comments. If you want consultant services, you can reach out to Bastien or myself. You have the URL of our websites here. And in the next episode, we will talk about designing and creating the first workflow on Asana. Bastien, thank you very much. A pleasure,
Thank you. See you next week.
as always.
Bye-bye.
See you. Bye-bye.